"You don't belong here anymore." That was the first thing my father said to me in 5 years. Not hello, not "you look well." Just that cold, final, like a sentence handed down in court. My name is Harper Vance, 34, former Army logistics officer turned nobody. I came back from overseas with shrapnel scars, 2 fewer friends, and a quiet habit of counting exits every time I walk into a room. Today, I counted 5, none of them worth taking. The Vance Holdings boardroom looked like a mausoleum pretending to be a meeting space, glass walls, polished walnut table, the faint smell of lemon polish and ambition. Around it sat the people who shared my blood, but none of my conscience. At the head of the table was Charles Vance Sr., my father, CEO, patriarch, and man who believed love was a liability. His silver cufflinks glinted as he leaned back in his chair, the same way generals do when they know the battle's already won. To his right, my sister, Evelyn Vance, 32, poised in her designer suit, a half smile frozen like fresh varnish. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Evelyn always believed silence was more powerful than cruelty until she learned to combine the two. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here for the reading of the late Martin Vance's revised will. My grandfather, Martin Vance, the only man who ever treated me like more than a disappointment. He taught me how to fix a car engine at 12 and once told me, 'You don't have to raise your voice to take up space.' When the lawyer read my name, the air changed to Harper Vance, my granddaughter, my only confidant. I leave controlling shares of Vance Holdings, $40 million in voting equity." Silence. My father's jaw tightened. Evelyn's manicured hand stopped tapping. I watched the color drain from Charles Vance Sr.'s face as he reached for the check like it had insulted him personally. He held it up, stared at my name printed in bold letters, then reached into his jacket pocket. The faint click of a lighter snapped the air. Flame caught the corner of the paper, curling it inward until my inheritance turned to ash. He didn't even look at me. "This doesn't bring you back," he said flatly. The room filled with the scent of burnt ink. I didn't move, didn't blink. Years in uniform had taught me that silence can be more dangerous than shouting. I met his eyes and said quietly, "You burned my name, not the paper." A few heads turned. No one spoke. Not Evelyn, who looked almost disappointed that I hadn't cried. Not the board members, shifting in their leather seats like witnesses to a crime they'd rather ignore. Charles smirked, as if he'd proven something. Maybe he thought destroying the check erased the man who wrote it or the woman he wrote it for, but Martin Vance had never trusted his son, and what he left me wasn't just money, it was proof. I looked at the smoke twisting upward, the last trace of my name dissolving into air, and thought, this isn't a meeting, it's a funeral. Mine. What they didn't know was that I'd already been warned. The real inheritance, the one they couldn't burn, was waiting in an envelope sealed and safe. And today, for the first time, I felt the heat rise not from fire, but from something sharper, something that doesn't burn, something that remembers. The boardroom emptied like a church after a failed sermon. No one said goodbye. No one even looked in my direction. I sat there for a long time, staring at the scorched mark where my father had burned my name. The faint smoke already gone, but the smell of betrayal still clinging to the air. When I finally stood, Evelyn was waiting by the doorway, phone in hand, voice syrup sweet. "You should have known better," she murmured. "Grandpa loved his little projects, but Dad doesn't keep what isn't his." Then she turned and left, her heels clicking like punctuation marks in a sentence I wasn't allowed to finish. I followed the sound of her fading steps until it disappeared behind a set of glass doors. Through the reflection, I caught my own face, tired, foreign, a ghost they'd buried but forgot to mark the grave. 5 years ago, I left this same building in a different kind of silence. I had been deployed overseas, the only Vance who ever wore a uniform that didn't have our company logo stitched on it. My father didn't attend the send-off. He said it was a waste of a Vance name. My mother, Lydia Vance hugged me quickly, glancing at him the entire time like affection was something to be rationed. Evelyn didn't come at all. When I came back 18 months later, thinner, quieter, and still flinching at loud noises, no one met me at the airport. I remember dragging my duffel bag up the long driveway, thinking maybe they'd forgotten I was due home that day. But when I opened the door, I realized they hadn't forgotten. They'd replaced. The smell of new paint hit me first beige, sterile, the color of pretending nothing ever happened. My room was gone. The walls where I'd tacked photos of my squad mates were stripped bare. In their place hung a framed quote, "Calm waters reflect best." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I recognized the message. My father had redecorated the house to erase me. The nameplate on my door that once read Harper now read, "Guest." I stood there for a long time, duffel still on my shoulder, listening to the muffled sound of Evelyn's laughter downstairs. When she finally came up, holding a mug of peppermint tea, she frowned like I was blocking her hallway. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You were gone." "What? A year and a half. You don't expect us to keep your shrine forever, do you?" I wanted to tell her I'd buried people who'd known me longer than that year, that I'd seen men disappear for less time and still be remembered, but the words never made it past my throat. Instead, I nodded, set my bag down, and slept on the floor that night because the bed in the guest room didn't feel like mine. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't even close the door behind me. After that, I rented a room above a mechanic's shop near the docks, cheap, loud, honest. I took a job as a night security guard and stopped answering the few calls that came from home. There weren't many, but every few weeks, a quiet wire transfer would hit my account. No message, no return address. Just the initials, M. Vance, Grandpa. He never called, never wrote, but he kept me alive when no one else remembered I existed. I didn't realize it then, but he'd already started preparing me for the war that wasn't fought with guns, but with paper and names. Now, standing in the ruins of that boardroom, I understood the warning hidden in his silence. My father might own the building, the company, even the family crest, but Martin Vance had left me something stronger: belief. I left the boardroom the same way I had left that house years ago, quietly, head high, steps steady, but this time I wasn't walking away. I was walking towards something they couldn't see yet, because the ghost they'd buried was done haunting the past. She was coming back to claim the living. The drive back to the Vance estate felt shorter than I remembered, maybe because memories have a way of shrinking when you stop feeding them. I hadn't planned to come here again, not after everything, but the smell of burned paper still clung to me, and part of me needed to see if the house that raised me could still recognize my name. The gates opened automatically, of course they did. My father loved control more than privacy. The mansion sat at the end of the gravel path, white columns gleaming under the early evening light like teeth. I parked, killed the engine, and waited for a feeling that never came. Inside, everything looked staged for a magazine cover: fresh flowers, crystal vases, a piano no one played. But it was quiet, the kind of silence that sounds expensive. I walked down the hallway I used to race through as a kid. The family portraits were still there, but one was missing. Mine. I stopped where it should have been. The wall was blank, freshly painted, a faint outline where the frame used to hang. That was my father's way of rewriting history: clean walls, clean conscience. Harper. The voice came from behind me. Lydia Vance, my mother, stood in the doorway. Perfect posture, pearls at her throat, eyes the same soft gray as the fog rolling off the lake. She looked the same, except older around the edges, like porcelain starting to crack. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said, though her tone suggested she'd known all along. "I didn't know you'd let him burn it," I replied. Her lips parted, then closed again. "It's not that simple. It never is for you," I said. For a moment, the air between us felt alive, full of all the words we'd swallowed for years. Then she smoothed her skirt, retreating behind manners like armor. Your father does what he believes is right for the family. And I'm not part of that family anymore. Am I? Lydia didn't answer. She only stepped aside, gesturing toward the door like a polite hostess seeing off a stranger. I walked past her, the faint scent of her perfume stirring something hollow in my chest. As I reached the foyer, I saw at my old bedroom door. The plaque had been replaced again. Guest room, beige paint, neutral, forgettable. I touched the doorknob once, cold metal under my fingers, then let go. There was nothing left to take from this place, not even air that felt like mine. When I stepped outside, the wind caught the edge of my jacket, tugging like a hand trying to pull me back. But ghosts don't go home. They move forward. And I wasn't here to remember. I was here to learn how to forget. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and rain when I saw Martin Vance for the last time. He was sitting in our usual booth, the one near the window where the sunlight always found him no matter the hour. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his cup, but his eyes, sharp blue, unshaken, still carried the same quiet certainty that made people listen without understanding why. "Did he call you?" he asked. Though he already knew the answer, I shook my head. "He doesn't call me anything anymore." He nodded, a small, tired smile. "That's his loss." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a plain envelope, no name, no seal, just wait. He slid it across the table, the paper whispering against the formica. "Don't open this unless they try to burn it," he said, "and when they do, make sure you burn brighter." I looked down at the envelope, the edges slightly smudged from his fingerprints. "What's in it, insurance?" he replied, and a reminder that not every legacy is meant to be inherited. Some are meant to be rebuilt. We sat there a while longer, the silence between us filled with everything he couldn't say. When he stood to leave, he rested a hand on my shoulder, light, steady, final. "Harper," he said quietly, "you don't have to raise your voice to take up space. Just stand where they told you not to." That was the last time I saw him alive. 2 weeks later, he was gone, and the envelope found its way into the back of my closet, between old uniforms and a life I'd stopped unpacking. Now, years later, his words still echoed, "Don't open it unless they try to burn it." And they had. The night after the boardroom, I sat in my apartment staring at the city skyline, cold light bouncing off windows that didn't know my name. My father had burned my inheritance, but it wasn't the money that haunted me. It was the way he'd looked through me, as if I were already gone. I needed proof I still existed, something ordinary like checking my bank balance. I opened my laptop, logged in, error, tried again. Same result. Account inactive. Confused. I called customer service. The man on the line sounded bored, like he'd answered the same call 100 times that day. "Ma'am, can I have your full name, Harper Vance?" Pause. Keyboard clacking. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance. Our records show this account holder as deceased." The room tilted. "What did you just say? Deceased? 2 weeks ago?" I laughed, sharp and humorless. "I'm literally talking to you. Yes, ma'am, I understand. But the system thinks I'm dead. I'm afraid so." The call ended, but the sound stayed the steady beep of disconnection, long after I hung up. By morning, I needed answers. I drove to the DMV, waited in a line that smelled of coffee and exhaustion. When I handed my ID to the clerk, she frowned. "You're flagged," she said. "For what legal death certification? I'm standing right here." "I get that," she replied gently. "But the system doesn't." Those words hit harder than any weapon I'd ever known. The system doesn't. I stepped out into daylight that didn't seem to want me. People brushed past, phones in hand, lives intact. I felt hollow, like I'd been cut out of the world with surgical precision. Then I saw her. Across the street. Sunglasses. Scarf expensive. Deliberate. The kind my mother, Lydia Vance, used to wear when pretending the cameras outside charity galas didn't frighten her. She stood there, still as marble, watching me. For one heartbeat. I thought I imagined her, but when a bus passed, she was gone. Vanished, like a shadow that decided it no longer belonged to its owner. That was when I knew this wasn't a clerical mistake. This was strategy. My family hadn't just wanted me disinherited, they wanted me erased. I drove home with my heart pounding, the world blurring through the windshield. Every intersection felt like a test who would believe a dead woman running red lights back in my apartment. I tore through my drawers until I found it the envelope from Harper Vance, still sealed, still waiting. My hands shook as I placed it on the counter. I wasn't ready to open it yet, but something in me whispered that I wouldn't have a choice for long. The phone rang, once unknown number. I didn't answer. I already knew who it wasn't. Outside, sirens echoed down the street, distant but sharp. For the first time, I realized that if my name disappeared from every system, I'd be a ghost with no trace, no record, no proof. And somewhere, in the quiet halls of my father's house, someone was celebrating the fact that I no longer existed. But they'd made one mistake. They forgot that soldiers don't die easily, especially not on paper. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's lighter the small, deliberate flame swallowing my name. By sunrise, I had decided whatever was inside that envelope, I was done being afraid of it. I set it on the kitchen counter. The paper was yellowed around the edges, soft from years of waiting. My grandfather's handwriting was steady, almost stubborn for Harper, only when they tried to burn it. I broke the seal. Inside was a notarized trust transfer, his signature beside mine. The ink so dark it felt alive, and a small black USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop, heart hammering. The files loaded slow, like they knew the weight they carried. Bank records, ownership certificates, voting rights, all of it connected to one thing, Vance Holdings, the real inheritance. Not the decoy check my father torched, but the company's actual control already transferred years ago, safely and quietly, into an offshore trust under my name. For a heartbeat, I felt something close to relief. Then I tried to access the linked account. Error, account closed. Reason, client deceased. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My father hadn't just burned paper, he'd burned my existence across every record that proved I was alive. I checked the document again, searching for a loophole, a name, anything. At the bottom of one file, I found a note written in Martin's voice. If you're reading this, it means they've turned family into war. Don't fight them with anger. Fight them with proof. I pressed my palm over the page. Proof. That was all I had left. Outside my window, dawn was breaking, a dull orange glow spreading across the skyline, the same color as the fire that started this. I shut the laptop, slid the USB into my pocket, and whispered into the empty room. You can bury me on paper, but you can't write my ending. The war my father started wasn't about money anymore. It was about memory, who gets to keep it, and who gets erased from it. And I was done being erased. The first person I called wasn't family. It was Clara Holt, a former corporate attorney turned independent legal consultant, the kind who'd been disbarred once for exposing her own firm's corruption, and wore it like a badge of honor. She opened her apartment door in a faded Harvard Law hoodie, a half-eaten slice of pizza in her hand. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, squinting at me. I am the ghost, I replied. Apparently, I died 2 weeks ago. Clara laughed, short and sharp, then gestured me inside. Tell me everything, and if it's illegal. Good. I'm better when it's illegal. I laid out the documents, the trust transfer, the bank statements, the emails from the deceased notification. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and crossed her legs, studying me like a puzzle she intended to solve. This is big, she said finally. Like federal prison big. Your father didn't just forge your death. He manipulated corporate control using that forged death certificate to claim voluntary transfer of your shares. I blinked. He faked my death so I couldn't legally own what's mine. Exactly. Which makes it fraud on a federal scale. She stood, grabbed her phone, and dialed. Dean, I've got one for you. Bring your magnifier and your least annoying attitude. 20 minutes later, Dean Mercer arrived, a forensic document analyst with the personality of a scalpel. He was the kind of man who could tell if a signature was forged just by the rhythm of your breathing. He flipped through the pages, lips moving silently. Then he pointed to a loop in the signature. Here, he said, see that H? That's yours, but it's been flattened, copied from your 2018 military discharge form. They scanned it, printed it, and overlaid it. Sloppy work, almost insulting. Clara smirked. Told you it'd be illegal. While they worked, I felt something inside me shift, a familiar pulse. The one I hadn't felt since the army. The adrenaline that comes right before a counterattack. So what now, I asked. Now, Clara said. We hit back with proof. Paper for paper. Signature for signature. She filed an emergency motion to freeze all board activity at Vance Holdings, citing suspected fraud and identity falsification. Dean drafted the affidavit, every page sealed with the evidence of forgery. When the documents were ready, Clara slid them across the table toward me. You're going to need someone who knows how to make this public. Quiet battles don't scare men like your father. Headlines do. That's when I called Eli Maddox, an investigative journalist I'd met years ago during a veterans advocacy event. He picked up on the second ring. Harper Vance, he said. Voice clipped but curious. Didn't expect to hear that name again. I'm not sure it exists anymore, I said. But if you want a story about a family empire built on ashes, I have files. He whistled low. You want it quiet or loud? No, I said. I want it permanent. By the time we hung up, Clara was already drafting subpoenas. Dean gathered the evidence into neat piles like building blocks of truth. At midnight, Clara leaned back, exhausted but grinning. You know what your father forgot, she asked. What's that paper only wins when no one reads it? And tomorrow, the whole world will. I walked to the window. Below us, the city hummed a machine of lights and secrets. Somewhere out there, my family was sleeping soundly, convinced they'd buried me for good. But ghosts don't stay quiet. Clara came to stand beside me, holding out the lighter she'd been using to melt wax seals. Symbolic gesture, she said. I took it, turned it over in my palm. Same weight, same click as the one my father used. Burn the lies, she asked. Not yet, I said. First, I want them to see the truth catch fire. Outside, the first hint of dawn crept across the skyline, sharp and golden. The war had changed. It wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about erasure versus proof, silence versus voice. And this time, I wasn't the ghost haunting their story. I was the author rewriting it. After the verdict, I didn't go back to the mansion. I didn't want the keys, the title, or the ghosts that came with them. The house could stay hollow. It suited the people who'd built it. Instead, I rented an empty storefront on the east side of the city, a place that smelled of dust and potential. I painted the walls myself, bare hands, no contractors, no board meetings. It was quiet work, the kind that let you breathe again. When the paint dried, I hung one thing on the wall, my grandfather's quote, printed in simple black letters, make something they can't erase. I called it the Vance Foundation, not for them, but for me. Legal aid for veterans and women erased by bureaucracy and family power. No plaques, no press releases, just open doors. The first client was a woman in her 30s, dishonorably discharged for reporting harassment. She sat across from me, shoulders tight, eyes wary. When she finished her story, she said, I don't need justice. I just need someone to believe me. I do, I told her. Her eyes filled, and for a moment, I saw myself sitting in that same chair years ago, lost, erased, waiting for someone to prove I existed. The foundation grew quietly, one case at a time, one name at a time. And every person who walked through that door became another brick in something my family could never burn down. I didn't build an empire. I built a refuge, because revenge ends when the fire does. But purpose, that's the thing that keeps glowing long after the smoke clears. And for the first time, the name Vance finally meant something worth keeping. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking home from the foundation when I saw Evelyn across the street. She was dressed in black, phone pressed to her ear, the same polished perfection she'd always worn like armor. Our eyes met for the first time since the trial. No words, no apologies, just silence thick, heavy, honest, for a moment. I saw everything we'd lost, the childhoods that never really belonged to us. The house that raised competitors instead of daughters, the love that had been replaced by loyalty to power. Evelyn looked away first. Good. Some endings don't need closure, they just need distance. I kept walking. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain and freedom. For years, silence had been my punishment. Now, it was my peace. I passed a shop window and caught my reflection. Not the ghost they'd buried, but the woman who walked out of her own ashes. They'd tried to delete me on paper. Now I owned the story they couldn't control. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build when no one believes you can. And mine finally was unburnable. If you've made it this far, maybe you've lived a version of this story too. Maybe your family didn't fake your death or burn your inheritance, but they tried to erase you in quieter ways, talking over your voice, rewriting your memories, deciding who you were before you had a say. I used to think silence was survival. Now I know it's surrender. When I tell people what happened, they ask if I ever forgave them. The truth is, forgiveness isn't freedom. Building something new is. So I built this foundation not for revenge, but for the forgotten, for anyone who's been made to feel invisible in their own story. If your name has been buried, if your worth has been questioned, if your voice was taken from you, remember this paper burns, but truth doesn't. You don't owe them a comeback. You owe yourself a beginning. Tell your story, write it down, say it out loud, because the moment you do, you exist again, and no one, not blood nor law, can take that away. This was mine. What's yours?